4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to yet another cracking edition of the Map Round Show. This is the Built in New York series where I'm connecting you, my audience around the world, to people like Keith Kirkland, the co-founder of Wayband and Wear.worx. Check it out. He is doing some hardcore, hard stuff in the wearable space. And strap yourself in because this is going to blow your mind, kind of what Keith and his team have done. So, Keith, thank you for being here today, bud.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
No, privilege is all mine, dude. So listen, I've obviously had the privilege of getting to know you and kind of poke what you guys are doing with the sticks, so to speak. It didn't get bitten. The bear didn't come after me. But for our viewers around the world and our audience around the world who, haven't had the privilege of getting to know WearWorks and Wayband and all the cool stuff you guys are doing, why don't you kick us off? Like, what's the origin story to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so WearWorks is a haptic platform company, and haptic just means touch. Basically, what we do is we use the skin as a communications channel to deliver information. And our product, Wayband, is a haptic navigation app that guides people to an end destination using only vibration without the need for any visual or audio feedback. So the origin story. That's what you wanted, right, Matt?
Yeah. Go for it, dude. Yeah, tell us about this. Like, why touch? Like, why does this matter? I mean, you could have taken existing go to A to B technology like Google Maps and made it slightly better, like Waze, for instance, but you didn't do that. You were like, hey, what if someone can't see? How do they go from A to B then? So we'll get into all that, but what's the origin story? Like, where did this particular genesis of the idea start?
Yeah, and so I always like to open up with like me and my co-founder, we came in through very different doors to the same space. And so my personal door I came through was I have a background in, engineering, fashion, and industrial design. And I had always trying to figure out a new way to learn movement that wouldn't necessarily have me go through all the surgeries and injuries that I'd experienced while I was learning new movements growing up. Essentially, I saw The Matrix 1,000 times, and I wanted to build a suit that would allow a person to download Kung Fu, and the suit would teach them using only vibration.
Amazing. That's pretty interesting, right? What's the problem here? I mean, it's kind of like a non-obvious solution, I would suggest. Feel free to correct me, to a non-obvious problem too.
Yeah, when I started with my work, I was really interested in the space of how is it possible to communicate movement? I studied martial arts a good portion of my life. I picked up skateboarding on my 33rd birthday. I had multiple surgeries with my shoulder, partially torn rotator cuffs, herniated disc in my lower back, bad knees from running. You get the gist, right? Every activity, basically, an injury follows suit soon after. And so what I was really looking at ultimately was like, how can I learn movement in a healthy way when I was doing things, especially when I had an instructor, but that instructor wasn't with me 24/7 to make sure every time I practiced that it was correct. And a lot of my injuries were those injuries that you get from just doing the wrong movement 1,000 times, right? And so I was like, wow, if there was a way to get that information without my teacher needing to be here, like I could stay in my game for a lot longer before I got an injury. And so, that became the ultimate goal of what I was trying to do when I started. And I was in my thesis year trying to figure out this world of how do you communicate movement without a teacher being present. And at that moment, I had a friend and, I was typing on my computer and she walked over behind me and she like put her index finger in my back and she put her right finger on my shoulder, index thumb, sorry, and did a push-pull motion. And ultimately, like, I straightened my posture. And I was like, wow. And then she walked off. She didn't say a single word. And I was like, wait, if I could do the electronic version of what she just did, right? Know my current and optimal posture and motion capture data, have a vibrating motor where she placed each of her fingers and indicate with pressure in that vibration motor how much I should align until I got feedback that I was in the proper position. Then the teacher could be supplemented with a digital assistant that could help you learn movement more accurately and more safely. So I started in this world, graduating with this thesis of like, I'm going to build this kung fu suit that's going to like change the way people move.
And did you succeed at that? Because like the last time I walked into a Nike store, I didn't see a kung fu suit branded as Nike, helping you to improve your movement.
Yeah, actually, there was a sidestep along the way that was, pretty insightful. And the thing I got from just my own personal research in the space was that, like, wow, if I want you to raise your wrist 2 inches off of your lap using vibration, like, how do I tell you to do that?
Mm.
Like, what vibration do I send to your hand that without any words, or without any instructions, you somehow know that you should raise your wrist 2 inches up higher, right? And this is where, the conversation really begins with WearWorks. Is like, that language didn't exist. Like, if I wanted to tell you what to do on a screen, that language exists already. I just tap into, English words, right? Whatever country you're in, right? But that didn't exist for touch, and saw a huge opportunity. Is like, wow, designing for touch would be so much easier if there was some tools and some, like foundational pieces in place that everyone didn't have to come to this haptic world and start from ground zero in their garage.
Right, got it. So, like, who's your customer here? I mean, is this is the Wayband? That's the name of the product, obviously. But is it really there just to help blind or visually impaired people to navigate? Was that always your intention?
Yeah, like, so we see Wayband as an evolution in the navigation and wayfinding experience. And when we started out to do this, while the blind and visually impaired was super high on our priority list, I mentioned the different doors that we came through. My co-founder Kevin came through the door of meeting a friend who's blind and visually impaired, having him come talk to a bunch of designers at our school. We went to Pratt Institute. And at the time before there was an inclusive design piece, just to get a sense of, like what the blind experience was. And Marcus talked about his challenges just getting onto our campus as a first time visitor who was blind. So he had challenges just walking and arriving to the building. Now, as a Pratt student, you also have challenges finding the buildings, right? But Kevin had the thought, was like, and had a conversation with him, was like, what are the challenges really there, and how could that be different? And he was also doing some work in the haptic space with wearables. So he saw a possibility of haptics being able to be used to help people who are blind navigate. And that's where our worlds coalesce, because of my world, navigation was just a simpler form of movement than Kung Fu.
Mm. Yeah.
Instead of
And
three-dimensional space, you have two-dimensional space, right? Instead of lots of points all over the body, you have one point.
mm,
And the whole language is really simple, right? Your body can be in any contorted position that, you have the capability to be in. But, from a navigation point of view, you go straight, you turn left, you turn right, wrong way, you've arrived. And so we really wanted to see in that space, like, if we could take the simplified version from my point of view of Kung Fu, make it much more wildly useful and accessible, transform like access for an entire population of people, and use it as the foundational steps to build what is later going to be a platform that the Kung Fu suit will be able to live on. We just felt like this was just the best place to start.
yeah, absolutely. I've got your website up for everyone. And I think this is quite an important. Well, I don't even think it's important. I think it's an incredible innovation. Like, how do you take someone who cannot see, through the streets of New York? You're obviously based out in New York. You know what I mean? Like, that's a dangerous place, dude. Like, like just crossing the streets, like pretty hectic when you can see. And like, you created this wayband, like that actually you can go from A to B in like a pretty complex environment like that. And I think the key thing I'd love to unpack for our audience is that, and you mentioned this to me. You said to me, like, Matt, like vision has been made king of the senses. Like like if it's Waze or it's Google, if I can't imagine just seeing black, like as in like the darkness of not being able to see. Like, I don't know how I would be able to function. You know what I mean? And I guess that's because I haven't been exposed to that environment, and I'm trying to get into the environment side of things. Interesting story. I was living in London like some time ago. I went to a restaurant. It was like French, but it was completely dark. Like you couldn't see anything. I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant like that. And dude, it was amazing. Like you walk in, and it's the waiters are all blind people, right? So they walk you around, they hold your hand, they have you sit down at the table, and then your guest or your date, sitting on the other side of the table, and the whole thing, the entire meal for hours is literally completely dark. Like you cannot see anything. And it was the first and only experience I'd had, because you actually now need to stop using visual as a sense to guide your entire modality or model of the world, right? And so that's a really interesting thing. What you guys have done is you've disrupted that whole spectrum, and you've made touch the most important sense. So I'm curious, how hard is that? I mean, like how do you do that? Like that's pretty hard from an outsider's perspective, right?
Yeah, definitely a challenge. And we've literally spent years refining this whole process. Because when we walked into this industry, like there was a breadth of haptic knowledge, but it's not so well connected. Like when I went to industrial design school, I took entire semesters of classes on color theory and how the eye processes color information. How if you put this color next to this color, it does one thing, and you put that same color next to another color, and you can create a completely different response or outcome in the user or viewer, right? Graphic design, we know like how to prioritize text in a way that it pays attention to you, right? Why do you have that red spot behind your head? Because we know red is color and grabbing an attention, right? So we have the science of sight down because we've spent billions of dollars researching over the last century, sight-based technologies. And touch just didn't get that same love, no pun intended. So, like how do we really tackle like Oculus VR headsets? Like our caveman counterparts had no, like no conception of a virtual reality world, right? So it's like it wasn't a natural progression of what we needed in life to what we did. What it was a natural progression of is what we figured out in research and then what we thought we could do with it to push the envelope further. And I feel like right now, like we have that for sight. It's very well established. We have that for sound even, like Bose, better sound through research, right? We have that for sound because everyone has a set of speakers in their hands or in their pockets, right? But we don't have that for touch yet. And smell and taste are coming. I mean, they're far away, but they're coming, but right now, about half of the electronic devices that you have that have screens, visuals, like 80% of them have speakers, audio, and 50% of them have haptic drivers in them, haptics, touch. And so we already have an existing platform that is well proliferated that we can tap into right now. Because at the end of the day, if I were to kiss you or to punch you in the face, you'd have a lot of information. But all we've done from a point of view of touch design, from a mass point of view, really is buzz, 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 look at me, phone, I'm ringing. We just think you could do better than that. And that's what we created WearWorks for, is to answer that question, like, what does that look like?
So I'm curious to know how it works. So on your website, you've got this, I think it's like a 3D sort of render model, I would say, using my own words, is that there's a guy running through like he's running on a path, let's say. And then you've got these bubbles, I would say, or they look like almost input sensors that as he's moving left or right, it's feeding information to him to, so that he stays on a particular course or what have you. I'm curious to unpack, like, how do you communicate information directly through the skin so that you can essentially drive without a map?
Yeah. And so now the full disclaimer, we haven't gotten to driving yet, but it is definitely on our roadmap. We're doing walking right now explicitly. And so the way this works is imagine Pac-Man, or, you're in New York, like a pie of pizza, right? Now, imagine you remove one of those slices, right? Or Pac-Man's open mouth. That's the right way to go. And when you're in that little cone facing that direction, you feel no vibration at all, like nothing. It's just total silence, just you, your world, and your journey, like total presence. You swing about 20 degrees left or right of that straight line of correctness, and you'll get a tiny vibration. It's kind of at the edge of Pac-Man's mouth or the edge of the slice of pizza. And then as you turn through Pac-Man's body, the vibration gets louder the longer you turn until you're 180 degrees the wrong way. And we give you the loudest vibration we can at that moment to let you know that you're most off track.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a game of hot and cold, kind of like loud and softness, but ultimately what you feel, and that little description actually is what people who have called it, they call it the haptic corridor. Because oftentimes what would happen is it's more like a haptic compass, like, magnetic north, right? The right way to go. Everything else is not correct. We let you know how wrong you are based off of the point that we set as your next point. And we're a mapping application. So, we know where you are, we know where you said you want to go, and we use mapping company providers to map you along the route. And so we know where you are, we know the next intersection, that's a straight line. And we know how to keep you on a straight line in between 2 points using only touch. You get to the edge of that point, we let you know, hey, a left or right turn is coming up, or we tell you nothing because you just keep going straight. And then after that, when you get that point, you collect it, we take that information, say, good job, we're going to point you at the next point now. All, of course, done through your skin, not with my words.
You know what would be hilarious is me coming to New York, right? Blindfold me and then get me to trust trust the technology enough to be accurate, right? Okay, so here's the scenario. How do you prevent so there's going from A to B, and then there's the environmental context also, let's just say a taxi's coming along and I'm there and I'm blindfolded. This would be hilarious YouTube content. Is Matt gonna get nailed or not? And then how do you factor that sort of stuff in, there's a it's not just the direction and turn left and right and hey, you're on course, off course. It's also hey man, there's a delivery bike or a Uber driver or a New York taxi or I don't know, somebody walking on the sidewalk. How do you factor all those input signals in?
No, that's a super great question. We don't.
Moving on. Moving on there, Keith.
And there's a reason. There's a reason behind it. It's what we're focused on is GPS. So the navigation challenge for people who are blind or visually impaired is actually a twofold problem. So you have the micro scale navigation problem, which is exactly what you talk about. It's hey, how do I avoid the fire hydrant, the person in front of me, the delivery guy on a bike, this chair, this coffee shop sign that's telling me to get coffee, right? That's on the sidewalk. And then the other part of it is the macro part, which is how do I find a post office? How do I find this new coffee shop that I'm going to meet my friend at for this business meeting, right? Those are the challenges that what we found is that this challenge in particular was particularly jarring for people with visual impairments, the anxiety of going to new places. The average person who's blind uses about 2.5 routes. One is to the supermarket, one is to the pharmacy, right? And so what happens when you have limited mobility, when you only feel comfortable going to 2 places? You shrink your life to fit into what is now you believe is your new capability. And what we saw as the opportunity is that by opening up that capability back, by giving that information in a new way so that they could use their other senses to navigate around. And also navigating blind is training. They have orientation and mobility trainers. People who are blind and visually impaired go to school. This is not run out and try to be blindfolded. It's really a process. They understand how to take in non-visual context information through a navigation context. So they have this training already really well grounded in the walking part. And so it's great if we can support with that piece of it. That would help. But they have that part figured out. The part that is really the challenge is this navigation piece. And then the other thing is that we went to the National Federation of the Blind when we had our first prototypes. And initially we were like, hey, why build a band? We're going to work with people who are blind or visually impaired. Let's put it all in the cane. We walked down with all this cane technology. And the first thing that the National Federation of the Blind told us was, don't build a blind device. Build a device that everyone can use, but that is optimized for the blind experience.
It's very interesting. I found a stature, Keith, which I think is pretty cool to share. So I basically asked God, Google, to tell me how many because I'm curious, like, how big is this problem, you know? So here's this. I mean, you probably know this already. I'm sure you do. But basically, for everyone else, like myself, how many blind people are there in the U.S.? So more than 12 million Americans over the age of 40 have some sort of visual impairment, with 1.3 million legally blind and 3 million who have vision loss after a correction. That's ridiculous, eh? And 8 million who have an uncorrected refractive error. If you add all that stuff up, that's like 25% of the US population, roughly. 25%, right? It's a big problem. And I love your point about this is about giving them confidence and the courage to unlock more experience of their lives. I'm using my own words here, through this technology, so that they can not just go to the shop and to the pharmacy, but like they can go to a friend's place. You know what I mean? Or whatever the case might be.
Exactly. And then also too, it's like we work with a lot with people who are like athletes, like we're working with like, hikers, runners, like, some of them are, local people that just love to run, like, run with Achilles International, for example, or things like that. But a lot of them are just, I mean, and some of them are really like high level, like Paralympians that we work with. And when you see kind of like what are the needs that they have, like it's interesting how across the board, like with thoughtful design, with really listening to your customer and really like trying to take all that information in and really synthesize it into a solution, like how many different pockets you can tap into and you can touch on. And so like we're constantly getting these amazing ideas directly from our community on like how do we make the experience better. And one of the things, like people who were athletes and who were blind, they were like, hey, look, I need to run around the park. And we're like, hey, our map can navigate you to an address. Hey, let's build a custom route feature so that like you could design any route that you want to run and we'll navigate you through your own route. And so not only is it great for athletes who are blind, but it also worked out to be great for like orientation mobility trainers who like during COVID couldn't get to people who are blind and visually impaired houses to show them the routes like in person. So it's like now we created a digital way that they can go in knowing the most accessible route through a city because that's their expertise. They've been in these cities for years, so they know the most accessible route and they know the most accessible route for your particular like group or particular disability, because oftentimes disabilities come in more than ones, right? And so, they might know the best way to get there for your particular ability, and now they have a tool that they can design that route for you and send it to you digitally. So one solution here, athletics, turns into like a really wonderful opportunity for like the orientation mobility training community. It's like, how do you predict that unless you go down that pathway, explore, listen, and iterate while you're down there?
Yeah, it's I want to now talk about like the different applications of this technology, because I think certainly there's visually impaired and blind and so on and so forth, but I think there's probably like dozens of use cases that aren't obvious. One of the ones that comes to my mind, and it might be super niche, I'm not sure, right? But like, let's just like, and the reason why I spoke to the founder of Zygo, they have developed also difficult hardware. You and Shira should I must actually connect you two, just so you guys can commiserate about like how hard it is to do hardware versus build a software startup. And so she built this thing for swimmers, right? So like you're swimming and then you can stream music, and it uses bone conducting technology underwater to stream music for swimmers. So you could get coaching as you are swimming, right? So now I'm imagining, well, before Keith and Wayband, like if you were blind, like that would be a no-go zone. But so now like one example could be you are a visually impaired swimmer who needs to swim in a lake or ocean or on some kind of course, or you need some kind of map. And then, your technology in theory could also then, help them in a swimming environment, right? So that's an interesting, non-obvious use case. Keith, what is from your perspective, obviously you've spent a lot of time putting CPU cycles into this into this problem, but like what are the other applications of this technology? Like you mentioned to me recently that you're a platform player with a SDK, so a software development kit, and you can open that up to the development of more additional use cases, for instance, not just the ones we've discussed to date. So what do you see as being like the outcome of this technology?
Yeah, and so, one of the things is initially when we started with Wayband, we were like, hey, you know what, haptics is really hard to do. You have to know software, you have to know hardware, right? You have to do the firmware so that they talk to each other. You also have to know fashion to make it like wearable and not break every time you use it after 3 uses, right? And so we took a lot of time building the Wayband because it was a challenge, but we were like, wow, this is a great opportunity, because what if we opened up this Wayband to everybody and just let them build whatever they wanted on it? And so that was actually our original plan, was like, let's create a band that makes haptic creation easy for like gamers, developers, like build your own applications, tag it into the Wayband. And then we ran into a very interesting challenge. No one knew what the word haptic meant. And so, it's really hard to sell haptic technology when no one knows the definition of, the word that is the foundation of your industry, right? Haptic means touch, in case you missed it. So, what we had to do is wow, we need to build our own first application, and in a way that kind of asking people what they want, they would have asked for a faster horse, right? How could you ask for a haptic solution if you've never heard of the word haptic before? And so what we did with Wayband was let's build the first application. And, initially we started with hey, VR, gaming, AR, obviously haptics is necessary. You can't have an immersive experience when, you have 5K visuals and, 7.1 surround sound, and you go to pick up the box and you don't feel anything, right? It's weird, right? And so we know it's coming there, but we intentionally went well, where's it going to go after that? Right? Because everyone's going to fight for where it's going now. Can we get ahead and where do we see applications of haptics interfacing with the real world? And ultimately what we see is haptics is it's XR, it's mixed reality, but instead of layering images over your visual scene, we're layering touch. You know what I'm saying? The same way that you can layer spatial audio, we're just layering haptics. So, ultimately the Wayband is an opportunity for researchers and developers and all types of people to connect and build applications and learn haptics in a way that they can. And this is ultimately how we forward the technology. And then the bigger piece is that we see a huge opportunity. There are laws that are being passed right now around, disability compliance for, mobile and websites, right? And, there's gonna be a point where it's to be a website, to be a mobile app, you are going to have to be accessible. I mean, it's bad that we're not there already, but it's definitely coming. And so what we're looking at is wow, we built an accessible solution because touch, just more people have access to touch information than visual or audio information as well. Right. And so that's where we see really the opportunity of working with companies like Google Maps, like Airbnb, like Uber, embedding haptic technology in and letting them use our haptic corridor and their own native applications. Because guess what? I already have my Wi-Fi password in my Airbnb. Why do I have to go to Google Maps to figure out where the door of the house is?
Yeah, I just I had to now Google haptic technology applications, because it's so interesting, isn't it? You think that you're in the mapping business, right? But really you're in the technology platform business. So for instance, like if you opened up your platform and your technology, you could start to do things. And I found, just to share some with you that I found here, but like obviously there's virtual reality, right? So navigating with input signals as opposed to just like VR, the metaverse. There's stuff here around eye surgeries, neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, and things like this. AR, augmented reality, and then it gets in super complicated, like single user haptic systems, dual user haptic systems. So actually, like when you really think, and this is what I love about visionaries such as yourself, is like when you start to think about the problem, and the more you think about the problem, the more you start to see. Whereas before, you know, you weren't even thinking about haptic technologies as a mapping technology, right? Or a mapping use case. And then suddenly, once you've solved that, it's like, oh shit, like we could do all these things. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like the Tesla idea, right? Like, listen, we've patented, I don't know, 30,000 patents, but you can go and use these things freely to solve this problem around EVs. Makes sense. And so very interesting to see like what some of these applications could be. And the other thing just to land here is that this isn't like something that's going to happen in like 5 or 10 years time. You've got a product that's literally in market now or going to market now. You've got partnerships with investors, BMW, Angels, the National Science Foundation, Amazon, Black Founders Program. Like there's a lot of partners who've come on board to start to work with you and your team and the technology.
Yeah, you know, we've been very, very fortunate. Like we landed at this intersection of accessibility, of, you know, innovative tech, and kind of like a potentially untapped, again, no pun intended, like, you know, communications channel. And so we have, we're currently right now in a program with Google. We've worked with Verizon. We've worked with so many names who have really put their energy and their organizations around supporting us. You know, like we found a solution to like move the map out of the center of the street and realized that at the cost of that solution, it didn't work for us. We reached out to Mapbox and like had a conversation with them. It was like, "Oh, here's what we're doing." And Mapbox was like, "Let's work with you because this is important." And so, you know, like it's been really humbling, you know, because I mean, GPS is, it is not the business to go into, you know, it's hard, you know, it's like because so much of it is like in satellites and in technology and in adoption curves that have nothing, and environmental factors that have nothing to do with within your control or within your realm. But also too, like what we're seeing is that the technology is just getting so much better, you know, and like, you know, 5G, we're looking at like hyper localization, we're looking at like ultra wideband technologies, we're looking at like L5 satellite signal service, and like we're looking at like LiDAR scans of the world now with autonomous vehicles. And it's like we have the data now and we're getting the sensors to be able to, you know, pinpoint accuracy. Like at some point we'll be able to keep someone like literally from like stepping off the curb. We're not there yet. Definitely not there yet. You know, like, but like these things are coming and they're so exciting because, you know, it just adds more fuel to the fire that we're building, that is like, this is going to be revolutionary. And like, this is only the navigation part. Like we haven't even, you know, the human navigation, we driving, cyclers, right? Like how many times do you like get off your bike and look at your map to see where you're going, or look down driving through New York City? That's super dangerous. You know, like pilots getting confused when they're flying through clouds and like, you know, flipping upside down, divers having the same problem when they're underwater. You know, like we see an entire way of kind of giving people kind of spatial information through touch. And then we see opening this band up because right now, right, Beyonce can get out of her bed, drop an album tomorrow, and have $1 million by the end of the night because we all have speakers and the 21st century equivalent of music, of the phonograph, which is music streaming. Now, we don't have like, where's our AirPods or our Beats for haptics, right? And that's what we're building, is like, because like AirPods doesn't care whether you listen to Bon Jovi or Jay-Z.
Yeah, absolutely right. And pretty soon, I mean, you can challenge the Klingons for interstellar domination.
That's the plan, Pinky. You know,
I know, right? That's where that brought. That's funny, man. So
Like
listen,
at my age there.
oh,
Anyways.
dude, I know, right? If all you Star Wars fans, you'd love that one. For everyone else, we don't care. Right. So, so just on the hardware stuff, because I keep talking about this to hardware founders, because I think it's an important point to labor from my perspective. Like, your build cycles are much longer than trying to do an agile software development process, right? So it's like design, build, test, different design, 3D printing. Then there's the supply chain component. Well, there's got to be this and the testing of different hardware circuitry and stuff like this. And then like that whole process from like version 1 to 1.1, is 4 months and a shit ton of money and a hell of a lot of pain and headache and frustration. And I don't think like a lot of software focused founders, entrepreneurs like fully appreciate that. What would you say has been like the hardest thing? Like, I know it's hard. I get that. We all get that. But like, what would you point to and say, Matt and everyone else in the world, like, this is what I would say being a hardware founder is the most difficult thing to deal with?
I think the most difficult thing to deal with as a hardware founder is the perception of the investor community on hardware. Because, ultimately, because of the capital intensity required in some hardware startups, like oftentimes investors who want to see that 18-month, 2-year exit that, you can achieve, quite provenly in some cases, remarkably, but possibly in the software space that just don't necessarily exist for hardware. But one of the things that I would like to counter with that argument is that like Apple is the most valuable company in the world and they give their software away for free. Like they get you to buy the crazy expensive hardware. That's how they get you. The software is just a lock-in, right? And you look at like companies right now, like Google is jumping super hard into the wearable space and with Pixel. Like Apple has already dominated that space for quite some time. And and you're looking at Facebook change their name to Meta. What I'm saying? Like in lieu of like what they feel their acquisition of Oculus is going to bring to the table. So it's like hardware is the way. Hardware is how you, because guess what? No matter how great your app is, all of your photos are showing an iPhone. And that's where we feel like the platform piece comes in, and that's the beauty of hardware. And I feel like that joy that we don't talk about a bit is like hardware is hard. It is definitely hard. The cycles are crazy. The component shortages because of COVID, being a small vendor and not having standing to, Apple buys up all the Bluetooth chips, and you're like, hey, they just bought like 1 billion chips, and you're like, hey, well, I need 1,000, and they're like,
Yeah.
tough luck,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that part is definitely real, but also too for us, because like we had investors who's like, yo, drop the hardware, and we're like, no, like the hardware is the key to all of this. You know what I'm saying? Because the hardware is how we, is how you touch a person in the real world. And that being a touch company, it's like could both
Dude.
outsource their speaker design? Yeah, sure they could, right? But like,
No.
the core competency.
Yeah, it's like Apple saying, it's like, that's the most ridiculous comment I've heard probably in a long time. Like, that's like Apple, like removing touch from their phones. That's what you know what I mean? Like, remove that. No, it's like, it's an essential part of the whole experience of the iPhone. Imagine having like a keyboard that now, like built out, and then you had to like dick around with like those old input fields and so forth. It's a silly idea, but I'm curious to maybe double click on what you said there around, the investors' attitude towards hardware. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think is the reason hardware attitudes, or let's just say, I don't know, what is the perception about hardware that you think investors don't understand? Like, what is that?
Yeah. So I think, I don't think necessarily that they don't understand it. I think it's understood. Like there are challenges, and the things are that the things that can create delays in a hardware piece can be out of control. And also too, you mentioned like, you make a slight mistake on one piece, that's thousands of dollars, that you need to turn around. If you're lucky, it's thousands of dollars, you know what I'm saying, that you need to turn around. So I think that, the risk profile has just been so much geared toward um, invest, grow, scale, and exit as fast as possible. And of course, that's the investor mentality. That's how they make their world. That's how they get the money so that they can give it to companies like us. So not necessarily a negate of that perspective, but one of the things that we want to open up and like create as opportunities is that is that hardware has more stickiness. It's like the TV in your house is the TV in your house for years, right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, but like that new app that you tried on your phone last week, right? Are you still using it this week? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like depends. So it's like physical products have a space. And as an industrial designer, like me and my co-founder both come from an industrial design background. Like we believe like very much in the ability of a physical product to deeply connect and build with a user in a way that an interaction simply can't, right? And you take our COVID world, right? It's like, yeah, we can still do all the stuff remote, but people are still dying to be in person. Like, why? Because like there's something there that representation doesn't convey, and that's what we feel. That screen-based interaction, all screen-based technologies force you to interact with a piece of hardware at the end of the day. And we see an opportunity to be that piece of hardware for the skin the same way that, some companies wear that for the eyes and for the ears.
So speaking of hardware, you guys have an integration with Apple's the App Store and the Apple Watch. So I got it up on screen here. And what I'm curious to maybe unpack with you, Keith, is the role of ecosystems in something like what you've done. Because you've got like wearables, Nike, right? iTunes, smartwatch, different ecosystems. You're a technology layer with a SDK. And you're able to open up your technology and into these other ecosystems so that they can do things differently or improve the way that the user experience or whatever the case is. What's your experience in the role of ecosystems in scaling something like this?
Absolutely essential. Like the thing is that when we started out, we always knew that the blind story and the blind possibility was so powerful that like, hey, we have to do this. This is amazing if we can figure this out. But the other part is that what we knew is that the story of the blind and visually impaired would be used as leverage for jumping into other ecosystems. Because now that there's an example, like no one ran the 4-minute mile, right? So I can't remember who that person was. Sorry, I had that name at the top of my head, but they did it. And then all of a sudden, like, it became a thing that humans could do. Like, like lots of people have run 4-minute miles, like since we've broken that barrier. And so
Roger Bannister, wasn't it?
Thank
I'm
you.
Googling it.
Perfect. And so like we're at a space right now where, in order for things to be sticky, like, like you need like lots of connections to lots of other ecosystems. Right now, we're looking at it from a wayfinding point of view in the blind and visually impaired community, but if we only stayed there, we wouldn't even be serving the blind and visually impaired community well, because we'd have to be so expensive that, at 70% unemployment rates and 32,000 median income in the United States alone, and that's like better than it is in a lot of places, like we wouldn't be affordable, so it's by going mass, like we actually lower the cost for our blind constituents, right? And so the thing is that by accessing these ecosystems, other partnerships, other opportunities, and now we're looking at introduction to like, what if we could navigate you to your seat in a stadium because of like hyper accurate location, right? Now, what does that do for a person with a visual impairment? That's amazing, right? But now, what does that do for a fan who just like wants a way better experience of getting to their seat than like, the current experience, right? And so, and also it's like you're at the game, you're with your friends, right? So like you need to get all that information to take you out of the experience that you're having here. because this is what it's all about. This is why you're paying for the ticket. So we're looking at really like, how do we embed, how do we show opportunities within different sectors? And we know, of course, we have the navigation piece, traveling, right? I've been trying to get a hold of like, Hilton, and like what happens when you can show up and, a person shows up at a Hilton in Jamaica and is like, here's your Wayband. Oh, we've marked off the 5 best places based off of like what you say was your interest that you should visit while you're here. And, your Wayband just takes you from place to place. And oh, when you're ready to go home, like Dorothy, you click your heels 3 times, you press the Wayband button 3 times, it navigates you back to your hotel room, right? And so we just see that by building all these bridges and connections, what we're really doing is we're solidifying a place for haptics. We're letting the world know that like, hey, this is the technology that you have access to now, that now you can explore with, that you can design with, and that you can incorporate into experiences to give a more multi-dimensional experience than, your flat screen, or your linear audio, right? And at the end of the day, like when you really think about it, digital basically means visual and audio. Like, it's like it's synonymous, like, and as human beings, like we walked into like this digital world and we basically only brought like 40% of our senses with us. And if you look at research dollars spent over the last 100 years on each of the senses, like you can see where most of it went. Vision, right? And so how do we build that ecosystem? Like, research has to be easy, development has to be easy, the tools have to be available. And when you have that beautiful mixture, it's just kind of like an amazing cook going into a kitchen is like looking in the fridge and like, oh, here's all the ingredients. If it's all good food there, like you're going to cook something great, right? Like, and that's what we're bringing. Like, how do we bring the ingredients that people will need? But then also, how do we show how those ingredients are used to inspire what's going to be the next generation of what we're calling haptic designers?
Incredible, dude. Amazing category idea, right? Haptic design.
Haptic design.
Yeah,
baby. I'm actually having conversations with universities right now, like around like, what does a 4-year curriculum look like? Like, because when I feel like when we're done our work, like your kids are going to be able to go to school and study haptic design the same way they can study graphic design, culinary arts, and music theory. Like, I feel like that's my personal like mission and vision, is that touch is accessible.
Yeah, I actually think like that, my view just in the time, like, I love doing the shows because I get a perspective like the one you've just shared. Like, I actually think you're not like, yes, you have a product application, yes, you have a platform, etc. But really, I think what you've done is you've created an entirely new type of science and design category. And I think the big opportunity from my perspective is putting what in the hands of 1 million designers and saying, go there and fix and create, go and create. You're you know what I mean? Like, it's you know what I'm trying to say? Like, that's where I think the real applicational leverage, the exponential leverage sits for me, because to your point, it's like how much R&D money has gone into like visual stuff and, and that kind of thing. And there's literally a design like application for UX design, conversation design, like you name it, graphic design, is design for everything. Zero, none before you and your team, like haptic design, like, and putting that in the hands of like people who have like contextual information, or even exposure in a particular industry or niche or sub niche or somewhere sitting there where your technology can plug in to truly change the entire world using that idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of our vision, is what happens when this technology is in the hands of 1 million people. And, and the thing is that like, did the person who invent electricity think about computers? Like, I mean, maybe, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, but probably not,
Probably
like,
not.
And so it's like, what genius ideas that are going to be taken for granted in 100 years are going to be built off of this technology that we're enabling. And that's the part that's really exciting. Like, again, for us, Wayband was we just wanted to build something to show the world what was possible. Like we didn't want to, and at first when I walked into this, I was like, man, king of the haptic realm, we're gonna own everything. And then I'm just like, yo, like I don't really care about, electrostatic over screens, for example. It's like, like I realized I'm like, wow, there are areas of haptics even that, because haptics is very broad, right? But there are areas of haptics that like I'm not necessarily so personally excited about. I mean, I'm excited about the technology being available, definitely, but like I'm not so personally excited to develop it, right? Like, and when I was looking at what I was interested in, and like right now, like I'm a huge gamer, right? It's like in gaming is obviously haptics. If you're a gamer, you know what the word haptic means. And like gaming, sex toys, like robotic surgeries, like those are our industries right now, right? And so, like, but as a gamer, I was like, wow, like there's such a huge opportunity to, just open up this experience and like to see what people can do with it. And I felt ultimately at the end of the day, like the amazing pieces of technology are the things that became building blocks for the next amazing pieces of technology. And we just want to play our humble, small, but definitely very beginning, an essential part of building the foundational fabric blocks that are going to be what are going to solidify haptics as the industry that it should be. Because at the end of the day, like I know people who are blind and deaf, they live pretty amazing lives, and if you're not touched as a baby, you die. So I just think that like like a shifting of the conversation around why we've decided that vision is the most important sense, like because there's conversations around it. Like even if you think about it, like to have vision, right, is knowledge, it's clarity. It's like the words that we ascribe to vision have a characteristic of godliness, right? But you look at the levels, the words that we ascribe to touch, like sex, sin, pain, it's like, don't necessarily have those immediately positive connotations, right? And that was created. That was designed also, right? So, because basically sex and touch meant, sex and touch were basically the same thing. And touch for most of human history was like, don't do that. So why would we spend research dollars? Because what's the first thing you're going to do when you get research dollars and you're exploring touch? Like you have to go wearable technology. First thing you do, lights in your hoodies, right? Research spending on touch. First thing you do, something around sex.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Keith, thank you, buddy, for being on the show. I think what you're doing is like truly visionary. Yeah, I'm very, very, very excited to see where you guys go. So congratulations on all your success. It's been a privilege having you here.
Thanks so much, man. It's been an honor being here, man.
Anytime, brother. Cheers, bud. Cheers, everyone.